All right, so my name is Fabiola De la Cueva. For those that you don't know me, I always introduce myself like you can call me Fab, as in fabulous and modest. For those of you who know me, you know why I'm saying modest. Very modest. So the reason we decided I was going to be presenting this was because the whole discussion started on the forum about reusable code. And I was like, well, you guys want me to talk about reusable code and how I combine the IPN and source code control with some of my customers, and there were several likes, and I was like, okay, well, I guess that's what I'm going to be talking about. And then I had to come up with a nice title in case this gets repackaged, I don't know, for an ID. So we came with 5 tips to modularize, reuse, organize, and bring order to your development chaos. And now the thing is, when I say chaos, normally sounds like chaos. So if I tend to use that in the presentation, I just want you to know that that's what, I'm not meaning these, I'm meaning chaos. Alright, so now that we got that off the table, let's start with what do I mean by reusable code. So it's going to be a group of VIs, classes, libraries, tools, utilities, quick draw shortcuts, project templates, anything that you can be using in multiple projects. You know, Brian was saying earlier, anything you find yourself creating multiple times or copying from one project to the next and then modifying. So it's anything that you are using in multiple places. So everybody here understands reusable code, right? Not saying anything new. Now I'm going to introduce kind of a new concept for some, and it's release code. And I'm not talking about building executables or installers. I'm talking about having some versioning system for parts of your code. Make sense? So code that is needed by any other part of your project that will be developed in parallel. So this is something that when I start working with companies that have the typical lone wolf that has a whole application, and all of a sudden they get a team, and they don't know how to work with a team. Because they're used to, oh, I'm just going to be adding something here, and then I can roll them here. And then the different circles that Brian was showing on the different modules are no longer controlled by the same person. So what you need to do in that case, or what I've been doing, is helping them figure out how to move their application, divide their application into different modules. So it might not be reuse multiple projects. It might be that this DAG just works on this project. It might be that error handling or that data logging module just works on this project. It's not intended to be reused, but it's going to be treated as if it was reusable code in the sense that we're going to be controlling it. We're going to know what version of the code we're using. What this allows us to do is that Justin can be working on the actuators control, right? While Darren is probably working on DAG. Yeah? And then I have Joe working on data logging. And this allows us early on to define APIs. So at the beginning of the project, it might be that the modules don't really produce anything, but the API is already defined. So I can build something that's going to be the way I'm going to be sharing my code. And then that other developer can communicate with it. Is everybody clear with this? Okay, so how many of you are already using something like this approach? Okay, so those of you that are not, I'm kind of curious what approaches we're using to manage and to work in multiple teams. And it has to be multiple members of a team. Anybody wants to volunteer to tell us what they do?
Each person develops independently, and then we get together and say, all right, what needs to be put back in?
So you're working independently, and then when it gets the time to put together, you just, at that point, you define how are we going to interface this. Okay. Any other? No? All right. Okay, so some of the tools that I've seen, the different teams that I've worked with, and by the way, the model I mentioned earlier is I work mainly with companies that have already a team of Labio developers, but they don't have an architect in-house. And like Brian was saying, they probably don't want it or don't even need it, or it's more than the fact that they just touch Labio a couple of months a year. And they want that after those 6 months that they haven't touched Labio passes, when they come back, they're able to pick up where they left. And sometimes that's not possible, right? They give me a call and they're like, I'm stuck, I really don't remember where to start. And we start talking, and he's like, okay, how do you know that? Well, that's a cue. What's a cue? Okay, parentheses, let's go a little bit refresher. Let me show you how Navi works, and then they get up and running. Okay, so some of the tools that we've used with those teams is BIPM, Navi source distribution, build a specification, source code control, feature branches for that, and pack project libraries. So what tools are you guys using? All the ones that are listed here. So who's using pack project libraries? Right? So you are the team pack project libraries. Over here we only have one person. You're sitting on the right side of the room. BIPM, free. Okay, BIPM Pro? All right, so about the same. Source code control branches? Okay. Homebrew solution? We have 3 homebrew solutions. Okay, what's your homebrew solution?
I've kind of backed off from source code control for a little while because
I'm going to have a heart attack.
Because of the massive number of file renames that occur, and I'm stuck with Perforce, which sucks with file renames. So I'm doing a zip and upload daily process until it stabilizes enough to...
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk later.
Is it at least automated?
All right.
Yes. It's automated, though.
It's automated, okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so he has a homebrew solution that creates a zip file every day. And it is automated, and I'm really about to pass out. Okay. What was the homebrew solution over there? No? You don't want to give me another heart attack? Oh, you misunderstood.
There's a tool that's nice for some stuff like this called Beyond Compare.
Beyond Compare, okay.
Source code control, but it's good at comparing by file names and by file folder structure what has changed. And if you do have to branch, be able to say, well, this is changed, independently.
So who's using Beyond Compare here? All right. Good. It seems like I have to go back to study on another course. Okay. All right. Who's using source distribution? Built in Navi. All right. So we have 2, 3. All right. Okay. And source distribution plus an installer. All right. Some of the same people. Yeah, I was going to say those that just use the source distribution. I know the first time that I taught the Managing Software Engineering on Navi course, and there was an exercise where we teach people how to do a source distribution. And then you hit build, and you're done. The BIs were put in BI library, no explanation, nothing. And I was like, okay, so then how do I share it with the team? Well, they download the project with the source code control, and right-click and hit build, and they'll have the BIs. I was like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work out. I think you need to add an installer. That probably will work better. LLDs. We need to have
It's only for code that's in maintenance. Hasn't been touched for 5 years.
Okay, maintenance.
Still exists, though.
All right.
There are a few use cases for distributing stuff LLDs still.
Okay.
They're looking at the
So, Alan's been saying that there's still some use cases for distributing using LLDs, and that if you're curious, you should look at Fabi 2015 beta.
Something might possibly be in the 2015 beta that might possibly use LLDs.
Okay, something might possibly, seems like somebody heard that in Fabi 2015 might use LLDs. Okay, I'm going to go check that out. All right, so my tip number 1 is architect code using building blocks. Modularize your code. Each module has its own repository and release cycle. So a lot of people, when I go to a new team and I encounter the lone wolf that is going to be now having a team, they're just used to creating code. Right? They might do some modeling, they might do some planning ahead. They just go directly to create code because there's not the let's separate the work between the different team members. So what I start presenting and talking to them about, and last year I presented about unit test, is the concept of creating the unit test before you create the code. And why do I do that? Well, now you're going to be interfacing with code from other people, right? And instead of waiting until you're done, creating the whole module and then realizing that, oh, you needed me to pass with the address. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, now you have to go change a lot of your code. When you create the unit test to test different parts, especially the public API of your part, you get into a situation where you start to realize what you need on your API. Because when you have to define the test, you have to define what is it the inputs that I have to give and what are the outputs that I'm going to receive. And more than likely, those are the things that the other person is going to need from their code. And then you validate and verify, you build, you release, and you notify the team of the new version. Right? That's pretty much the concept. Now, yes?
You also want to verify your installation. After you build, you want to verify your installation.
So I'm saying after you build, you want, and before you release, you want to verify that the installation works. Good point? All right. So what are the advantages of doing this? Okay, developers can work on modules in parallel, right? An API gets defined early on. I already mentioned that. Having to build a release version of code, encouraging testing of parts. One of the biggest pushbacks that I get when we implement something like this in teams is like, but Fabiola, you're making me inefficient, right? I want to just do a quick change here, test it, and then I'll build it again. And what ends up happening, right, is they go do the test or the little change, but they never go back and notify anybody about making that change. They don't run the unit test. I've done it. About a week ago, we were doing something with a database, and I was using code that Chris had written, and I realized that there was something on the API that I didn't agree with, and I needed to change it to fit the needs of the feature that I was working at the moment. So what did I do? I went and changed it, right? But lucky for me, I ran the unit test, and about 15 tests failed. And they were in areas that I was not touching at the moment. And I went and looked at the unit test, and the unit test pretty much said, you're going to want to change this. We have decided that we're going to do it this way, and here are all the reasons, and here are all the modules that are going to be breaking. So I didn't have to, Chris didn't have to come and tell me, why did you do this? The code itself, the unit test told me that I was about to break code that he had already implemented. Right? So I've also, other developers that I work with, they say at the beginning they hated it, but it forces you to think again on the API and how you're going to be testing it. And I actually want you to take that time to do that, right? I don't want the Lone Ranger doing changes directly on the BI library and then not telling anyone else. And then the typical answer, well, it works on my computer. Well, it doesn't work on mine, so let's figure out what we're missing, right? Circular dependencies are spotted early on because you have to build this release of the code. You need to figure out what you're depending on. And everybody understands here what a circular dependency is? We're good?
What did you say?
Circular dependency? Do you know what a circular dependency? Okay, you're going to get me. Okay. All right.
The dependency was a circular dependency.
Yeah. and then you have to go back. It's basically when module A has a public API function that calls something from module B, and module B has another public API function that calls something from module A. Normally, these things break pretty bad in large applications, so it's good to spot that early on. So, the predicaments. You want to separate source code from release code. You want to manage versions, manage the release process. So the predicament number 2, we make our code available via the palettes. Oh, cool. QuickDrop finds it, right? Once you have a palette. Yes, but I have to uninstall the code anytime I want to work on the source code. Okay, I want to hear who has gone through this. Alan? Oh, there's somebody over there too. Okay. There's about 4 people. The advantages. Differentiate between source code, which is on release, and release code. Quick confirmation release code is in use. And you can use prefixes or suffixes, and they can be added. If you're using the DIPM approach, the free version can add prefixes and suffixes. Because I've had customers say, no, but I need the Pro version. No, you just need the Pro version to make the name shorter on your palette. But the prefixes and suffixes is something that you can do.
Fabiola.
Yeah.
So this is correct with the IPM, but when you have classes, you prefix suffixes.
No, but if you do it on the classes, what you do is you just prefix or suffix the class.
No, but when you have inheritance, and if you prefix a class, so then you
Yeah, so I'm on the advantages. If we go to the disadvantages, it can result in a long chain of prefixes when working with classes. Yeah, that's my full name. And if I was born about 10 years, a century ago, I would have to append to that even my great-grandfather name and everything. So when I became a U.S. citizen, I dropped the second part. It was really deep. So rename the class only. That's going to cause other problems with, well, it might go against style guidelines. Dynamic loading BIs, if you're loading by name, that might cause problems. If you're doing factory pattern by name, that might cause problems. And you lose the class mutation history. So there might be reasons why you decide not to rename the classes, but then at that point you need to figure out how you're going to be handling those issues. Any questions?
And that's why you end up uninstalling the package.
Yeah. Yeah, so the people that decide not to do that, they have to uninstall the package in order to work on the source code. Okay. The only way to check a version I'm using is via the IPM. So why don't you add a version number to the description of every VI in your release code? That will make my source code control commit huge, right? I'm touching every single VI. So the ways I do that is easy to create a scripting tool that will add this description to every VI. VIPM Pro has an option to add author, VI version, any other information that you want. And the nice thing is that it does it right before it gets the VIs get packaged, but it doesn't touch your source code. So this means that when you do Control-H over your VIs, the description will have the version at the very bottom. So for those of you who are doing toolkits and releasing them on the Tools Network, that's a really nice thing for your users, right? Instead of having to go to VIPM to figure out what version they have, they can use the Control-H. Okay, predicament number 4. So this is my new character member of my girl cartoons there. She's the diva. This is the list we give to members of all the things they need to install. So you could create a configuration file that includes all your favorite tools, OpenG, Hidden Gems. They will only have to right-click and apply them, and they get all the packages installed. Now this is if you're using VIPM. So who's using VIPC files? Okay, oh, very good. So the rest of the people that didn't raise their hand, are you using VIPM? Okay, and you're not using VIPC files? No? Do you know what a VIPC file is? No? So it is basically a list of all the packages that you're using on your application. And it can be listed by name or actually contain the package. So when I do work for hire and I'm going to be releasing the code for my customer, I can give them the older source code and then a VIPC file that includes all the packages that they need to install in order to use it. Yes.
So it's not just a list by name, it's like versions as well.
Yeah, it's the name and the version. It includes both the name and the version. So keep a list of what release code and what versions are needed. So VIPM Pro has configuration files that list all the package needed and can contain the packages themselves. VIPM Free can apply them. So you need Pro to create the VIPC files, but then VIPM Free can let you apply them. Another little trick that I don't know if everybody here was aware of is the IDNet drivers. So if you download an IDNet driver, it comes as a plug and play. It's a zip file. There's a tool on VIPM that helps you convert an existing IDNet driver into a package. So if you have applications that have lots of instruments, you can create packages for those instruments. And then just distribute them with your VIPC file as well. So were you guys aware of that?
You need Pro for that too, right?
Jim, I don't think you need Pro for that one, do you?
I think so.
I think you do.
You do? I thought I checked.
Everybody should download it and try it.
Yeah. By the way, I'm not getting any kickbacks from plugging VIPM, but we can change that, Jim. So how to manage all those release modules, right? That's the next issue. So this is why I encounter sometimes when I have convinced people of moving toward more modular approach. They have the repository for each one of their tools, and then the package or the build distribution or however it is, or the package library is on the same repository. Now what's the problem with that? What's the problem if the release code for module 1 is in module 1's repository and then the one for module 2 is in module 2?
The issue I run into a lot is like if the customer calls up with a bug and you have your, the application you're working on in one repository and you roll back to that version, that doesn't necessarily mean you rolled back the other modules to the state they were in when you released.
Yeah, so when you're using just source code control is not, it's version, it's source control.
It's not dependency management.
It's not dependency management, it's not configuration management, right? So one of the things that I love about the IPM is the fact that I can install a new version, right? Then see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, I can go back, Joe, you broke my code, so I revert to the old version, please go fix these bugs. And I can continue to work on my stuff, right? With source code control, it's a little bit more difficult to do that, because even if I revert to the version of module 1, I might not know exactly what version to revert to for module 3, module 4. So one of the things that I suggest to teams is organize the release code in one place. Now I'm not saying that one of these is better than the other. These are the solutions that different teams with different needs have come up with. There's having the release code in an FTP site, having it on a map drive if you are in one of those security conscious organizations that have really hard firewalls. Dropbox, if you're not in that type of organization. Source code control repository, this one has caused controversy because it's like, well, but you're now, especially if you're using packages, the version number is part of the name, right? So you're not really using it as a source code control because now every time you add a new package, you have a new file with a new name. But I'm working with teams that are not necessarily software engineers. Maybe this is the first time that they're using a source code control system. So I don't have to introduce a new tool. They already all have password and access to the source code control system. They all know to go there, so we can have a repository for the release code. And they know that when they need to find a new version, they can go there. The other option is to have the IPM repo, but that requires that the entire team has to. So that's just a consideration. All right, any other uses there or questions? No? Wow. Okay. What did I do?
Real quick then. So I got the chance to own the DACA system about 5.5 years, and we did this modularized kind of development. We found that we had dependencies that depended on dependencies that depended on dependencies, and there were like 50 different modules. How do you recommend that we go about, in the correct order, building all the dependencies, kind of bubbling up changes?
So it goes back to the discovering the circular dependencies early on. When you start dividing the modules, you're going to find out, okay, John needs for Dave to finish this particular package in order to build there. So we should build first the lowest dependency and then the next. If you are using build servers, you can actually script that to have you run the unit test of the lowest dependency. If that doesn't fail, then you build. If that works fine, then you go run the unit test of the next one, because that unit test needs to run with the installed version of the previous one. And you keep doing that until you find the bomb email that you're going to have to send, Joe, you just broke it for everyone. And then they have to go fix it. Right? If you don't have an automated way because your application is smaller, then you just have to have some sort of list of managing those dependencies.
So yeah, that's a really good point. We use PPLs, and that rebuild process can get crazy with really large projects. And so we wrote our own tool to manage that for us. I'm curious, who's also written that tool? considered as this side of the room.
Yeah, it's going to have to be in this side of the room because there was only one PPL person over there. So anybody here has created their own tool to set up the build of PPLs? Okay.
Well, we don't build PPLs, but the DLLs in our chain, yes. Because we have the same, gigantic dependency on drivers, on graphics layers, and whatever.
So one of the reasons I moved away from PPLs was because they were version specific. And with some of these teams, they probably build a package or part of the release code, and they're not going to touch it again. And if they have to increase the version or go to the new version of LabVIEW, they want to leave it that way. And one of the advantages of VIPM is that when you install a new version of LabVIEw, it mass compiles to the new version. So it means that they don't have to go touch it again. Right?
Fabiola?
Yeah, Mark.
Fabiola, what do you recommend when your source distribution has third-party drivers, like maybe taking them off of IPNet or not, wherever? Would you recommend keeping those drivers with the source or installing them directly in the PC where it's being distributed?
So the IDNet, you can convert it into a package. So if you're already using VIPC files, just all the IDNet drivers, you should make them into packages and have one single thing your team has to apply. But drivers like DACMX, like just yesterday, I had an email from one customer that they're setting up their build server, and he's like, the build is failing, and they're using BLT to do the building of the code. And BLT was saying there's an error, try with LabVIEW. Well, it turned out that they forgot one of the add-ons. So in my wish list, it would be that we could have some way of building everything, this release code that I'm talking about, that it would also be all the LabVIEW add-ons and all the drivers, right? That can make all that. But given that we don't have that today, what I've done is put, and this is something that I think Jack suggested at one of his presentations, is that you put all the installers, the drivers and everything in with the project. Because they should not be in a central location. They're going to be different for every project, right?
Anything that is not in source control, by definition, is out of control.
Yeah.
Robbie?
Just to add to your point, we also build a lot of project libraries, but to build only what's necessary. Every time we change one component in the system, we have a tool that would look at all the project libraries, like load all their sources, and we add filters on that. We change these components, and it goes through, looks through each one of them, and it rebuilds it only if it depends on what we changed. So at the end of it, we get to see, did we have any dependencies that we didn't know about? And we get a list of only the stuff that we knew to it.
I'm not sure if it was explicitly mentioned, but the VI package configuration files by default will add a copy of the package file itself inside the VIPC, so you always have the actual package on there.
So I might not have been very clear, but I did say you can either just list them by name, by reference, and if they are in the central repository, it will be pulled from there, or you can specifically say it's a store with the configuration file. Yeah. That's actually a good tool, because when the rest of your team is using VIPM free, the person that has a VIPM Pro license can just include them there.
Or just making sure that whoever gets the code, whether it's a build server or another developer in the future, like maybe they don't have access to the repositories or it's not there anymore, like you always have a copy of source code control.
One other trade-off, I actually picked this up from C and JavaScript, is just don't depend on things. Basically, you trade off duplication for the reuse. Sometimes it makes sense.
That's a great segue. I don't know if I'm alone here or not, but one of the things that really irks me about the paradigm that we have as a LabVIEW community have created is this idea of like the global code reuse library. So VI-lib, user-lib. It really drives me nuts. I think VIPM is great. I try to employ a lot of these practices, and VIPM is the best way to manage that, for sure. But I would much prefer to have my code, like Jack said, like for a particular project, I want to have my reuse code in that project. I don't want to have somebody go and install a bunch of packages and things like that.
But if you have a single VIPC file, it's in your project, because the VIPC file has all the packages in it. And it doesn't have to be VI library. You can package, when you're building your package, you can set the destination that you want. And that could be a relative path to where you're at. So if you want the package to still have the version control of the release code and still have it with your code, you could.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that becomes a problem, though, is that on a really bad day, I could be switching projects. I could maybe be working on like 6 or 7 different projects throughout the day. So I have to go reconfigure my environment for each one of those, because I may get a call from a customer that I haven't touched their code in 2 years.
So my solution for that is I use virtual machines.
Yeah.
And I have a virtual machine for each customer. So.
And it's actually pretty much almost required, because all the NI device driver, like Index, this customer use this, this other one use that. So when you switch project, you can control so much, but you're not going to uninstall library and Win, so it allows you for just the driver set. So it's.
You may be saying that when you cannot really be doing this, because you still have to rely on the DACMX version, the Visa version, the GPIB version, and all of those, if they're different for different customers, you would also have to be doing the back and forth for those. So it's better, in that case, I think it's better to have a virtual machine. And this was a discussion that was more on the, I think it was on the Champions forums, that, how do you manage your virtual machines at that point, because they can become huge. Well, what you do is, the only thing that you're keeping on the virtual machine is the installation itself, but then the project files and everything might be on the host. So that keeps the disk footprint of your virtual machine small, and you can still switch between them. But yeah, I mean, the ideal would be we had a single way of having all these dependencies be applied and installed by the same thing. So I just use a little, and I get all my release code, all my drivers, all my instrument drivers, all the dependencies from LabVIEW, all the add-ons, and everything gets just magically installed. Yeah, I would love that.
So I guess the model that I really like is that if anybody uses Visual Studio, NuGet is just great, because I can install the package for, say, SQLite or something like that right into my project. And so my project has everything I need right there, and I can manage dependencies right in the project as well, and they can be completely different from another project.
Yes.
So pretty much with the exception of some of the stuff that's in the global cache, everything's in the project. So that's the way that I'm trying to go with a lot of my projects in LabVIEW.
Yeah,
Tough because we don't have good tools for that.
And there's another thing that takes time for people to realize. If the VIPC file is part of the project, there's really not a tool. Like, it would be great, by the way, to take that. It would be great if when you open the project, it recognizes that there's a VIPC file there and goes and says, you need to apply your configuration, you're out of version. That would be really nice.
I think that'd be
That's what?
That's that on mine.
It exists? Okay. So how do I set that up?
Let's take that offline. So, yeah, Eric and I, we actually kind of dork out on source code control strategies and such. And I've gotten a lot of mileage actually out of doing, not unlike what he's saying, you have your reuse library as a repository, which then becomes a sub-repository of each application, except it's not necessarily the mainline reuse. It is a fork that is forked specifically for that application. And what this means is that your application can atomically track exactly any snapshot in time of the reuse library. Because it's a fork of the mainline, you can edit it directly in source. In other words, you don't have to worry about this problem of, oh no, I need to edit this reuse library, but yet I need to go back to its source repository. You just double click, drill down, edit, check it into the fork, and if you want to bring it into mainline, do a pull request or a push if you have push access, and you're kind of good to go. There are trade-offs, but it lowers a lot of barriers when you're kind of under the gun and you need to develop pretty quickly, say on the customer side.
Yeah. I just want to comment on that, just because I've run into the issue where when they're separate repositories, you have a dependency on a different build. So if you make changes and you say, I need that in my reuse library, and you commit it, but it's sitting in your develop branch and it hasn't been released yet, and when you go to build your current application, it breaks because you don't have this new BI in the new release of the other repository. So that kind of helps to alleviate that since it's local.
Because it's atomic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Jeffrey?
You would,
It's right because of me.
you had mentioned about choosing where you would install your package, like you say, for a specific project. But are you suggesting that, like, one of your packages would be installed in, say, your user.lib in one case and in
No, actually, this is something that I was discussing with Stephen, because Stephen was saying if something belongs, in the case of people that work at NI, like if something belongs in BI libraries because it's a release tool that you got from the tools that work, if it's something that was released by NI, and he was saying that during, and I'm paraphrasing you here, Stephen, so if I do it wrong, please let me know. So he was saying if you want to test like 2 different versions of the package, you could install it in different paths. And we're talking here not even lobbying paths, like just, my documents, whatever, and put it there. Now, none of my customers do that. We all use either user library or BI library. Majority just uses BI library because that happens to be the default for BIPM. And it's a no-brainer.
I can put a plug for Steve Watts on his blog. He talks about this. Steve and I talked about basically where you install things. And again, this comes back to the question of runtimes, drivers, etc. If it's not in control, in source code control, then it's out of control. And so that's one criticism even for like VI Live being inside of VI Live and not be locked down in some way. Because you can unintentionally make changes to it and not necessarily realize that one environment is different from another. Whereas that would be readily evident if every single piece of source code, not distributables, not necessarily runtime DLLs, but source code is in the repository.
But yeah, basically when you're building the package, instead of putting BI library as the destination, you could put a relative path that is leading your...
Right, but you couldn't have it in the VI library at one time and then move it over because
No.
you lose...
You lose all the linking and everything. This is a decision that you would have to do early on, yeah. And I think that's why we end up all sticking with whatever the default is.
And that follows the precedent of like apt-get and NPM, Homebrew, NuGet. So you have different options. You can have global installations or local project installations.
So any other questions, comments, complaints, suggestions? No?
So, the book that Dimitri is always talking at us, which is really good, Robert Martin's Natural Software Development, has a section on packages and using packages in a broader community sense of a distributable code module. And there's very great content in there on package design and avoiding dependencies, and I heartily recommend that for anybody doing package design. It's been the thing I've been thinking most about the last year. So.
Second that one. Anything else? I think it's ready to start again.
Question. All right, final question.
Okay, I'm ready.
Actually, this is just a little bit off topic, but because we brought up the thing about source code control. Last night at the dinner, I was talking to somebody, I think they work for MI, who was telling me about a cool front end for Git that would solve a lot of my source code control problems. And I gave my business card.
Source tree.
Source tree.
Is that, maybe that was it? I don't know, but whoever that was, if you're in this room, just email me that thing. I gave you my business card, but they haven't emailed me yet. I can't remember what it was called. Source tree? Okay. It just made the whole renaming thing totally trivial to deal with. And I tried to convince my boss to let me give up the Perforce and switch to that if I can make it work.
So does anybody remember having this conversation with John? I hope they didn't have enough to kill us that they actually remember they had this conversation with you.
I'll look at source tree if that was it, but I can't remember the name of it.
Probably. Okay, let's get Fab a huge